Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on yet another snowy day. Will it end soon? Maybe on March 30th. We are here today to discuss Turkey's upcoming election cycle starting this weekend on Sunday. There will be municipal elections, local elections on March 30th. And then in August, mid-August, we'll have the presidential elections in Turkey, which will be followed by general elections in 2015 as scheduled right now. And this election cycle is quite critical for the next 5 years at the least. It will determine probably what's going to happen with the AK Party leadership and whether opposition will be able to show improvement electorally, and how that will affect broader issues, bigger policy issues such as the Kurdish question and new constitution and other foreign policy issues as well for the next several years. In 2003, we saw the several critical things happening in Turkey with the Kurdish question, and then in the summer, Gezi Park protests happened, and then in December, there was a draft probe launch, and the implications of that political struggle as well. These will have a bearing on these municipal elections, and when you look at the campaigns, you see what the issues. You see that it's more than a local election. So, anyway, let me not talk a lot more. But we are very privileged today to have Ambassador James Jeffrey with us. He's with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He has a lot of experience in the region on Iran, Turkey, Iraq, and he focuses on U.S. strategies to counter Iran's efforts to expand its influence in the neighborhood in the broader Middle East. Ambassador Jeffrey served in Ankara and Baghdad as ambassador, and he also served as assistant to the president and deputy national security advisor in the George W. Bush administration, with a special focus on Iran. His resume is much longer, so I'll leave you to it, to read it. And to my left, our executive director here at SETA DC, Mr. Cebeci, Erol Cebeci. Erol Cebeci has a long career in politics in Turkey. He served as a parliament member 2 terms with the AK Party. During his time there, he also served as a member of NATO Parliamentary Assembly, first as member, then as the chairman of the Turkish delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. And he worked on issues, human rights issues, security and defense issues, and foreign policy, as well as European politics. So, without taking much more time, I'll turn over to Erol Cebeci for his remarks, and then we'll turn to James Jeffrey, Ambassador Jeffrey, for his remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. And for those of you who follow Turkey, this is a critical turning point. This upcoming elections on this Sunday is a critical turning point for Turkey, because practically these elections will determine the political future of the country, at least for the next 5 years. Usually, local elections do not have that level of importance in Turkey. But if you look at the next 15 months, you will see that the local elections on this Sunday, then the presidential elections on the month of August, and you have, if it is not moved, you have the parliamentary elections on June of 2015. So within a 15 months period, there will be 3 elections in Turkey. And keep in mind also the August elections in Turkey, the presidential elections, for the first time in the history of Republic, these elections, the Turkey will elect a president by popular vote for the first time in its history. So this is something new for Turkey. Usually in any local or parliamentary elections in Turkey in the past, the health of the economy is the most major factor. However, surprisingly, it is not a major issue in this election. And if you look at the meetings and rallies and listen to the speeches of the political leadership of political parties, you can testify for that economy plays a small role in the rallies, in the speeches, in the interviews. And instead, there are 3 major issues of these elections, and I will not order them in a particular order, but one of them is Kurdish peace process. The other one is what we have known, or what is named commonly, is Gezi events. And the final issue is what is called the AK Party and Gülen break. I believe that these 3 will be the determining factors of these municipal elections. I would like to express that these 3 issues, none of these three issues is a local issue. They are nationwide issues. And you cannot associate any of these issues with the local elections, which usually in the past, the local elections was dominated by the quality of the service provided by the local municipalities, or the strength and the experience of the candidates who will run for the mayor's office. And also keep in mind, none of these 3 issues were an issue in any of the recent elections. If someone looks at the recent polling data in Turkey, no big surprises are expected from the local elections. Again, this is something that I can conclude, but this can be challenged. But even though no big surprises is expected, perception of success or failure of the ruling party will have an impact on its calculations with respect to presidential elections and the parliamentary elections that will follow it. So based on what happens in these elections, ruling party will make decisions that will determine the candidacy of certain individuals for the presidential elections and the parliamentary elections. If you look at 2013, AK Party was challenged domestically through events outside the formal political channels. Large-scale street protests, commonly referred to as Gezi Park events, in the summer of 2013, was the reaction of the certain segments of the society who, in my judgment, saw no viable opposition to the government through the existing parties. And in the later stages of the protests, especially after police used excessive force, the events were hijacked by more radical groups rather than the starters of the events, and the government's handling of the situation was painted as anti-democratic. And you can, and I know in a country like Turkey where the polarization levels, political polarization is really high, you are, as any individual, entitled to your own opinion. And you can look back and read it differently, but most of the analysts conclude that by looking at the events, those Gezi Park's events did not lead to the emergence of a new political force. But this is also will be tested And it will be interesting to see if the Gezi Park events can or will have an impact on the ballot box on this weekend, especially with the younger voters. Now, in December 2013, a network of prosecutors, judges, and police chiefs, usually believed affiliated with the Gülen movement, launched a graft probe. The timing, the unusual bundling, and the presentation and the special coverage of the events from the very early hours of those events make it possible to conclude that these were politically motivated, and some might argue that they aim to bring down the government through the use of the state power in response to government's plans to close the private prep schools in the country. In some ways, this could be compared, or this could be seen as a rehash of the 2007 presidential crisis, when the country in 2007, at that time the president was elected through the parliament, was going through the presidential elections. The judiciary then intervened with a decision of 367 to design the politics from outside and the presidential elections. And since December 2013, the Prime Minister Erdogan has changed his cabinet and fought back and turned these local elections practically into a referendum on AK Parti's rule. So far, unprecedented crowds have shown up in the rallies of AK Parti throughout the country, and we will also see if this strategy will help the party this weekend on the ballot box. Although it appears to be more in the background when you look at all those events for this election season, the resolution of Kurdish issue, which is in practical terms full disarmament of PKK in the short term, remains the single most important challenge for the country, along with a need of a civilian constitution. The Kurdish issue doesn't concern only the Kurdish rights, but also it will define basically the relationship between state and its citizens. As AK Parti made these local elections a platform about national issues, many in the country will vote according to whether they support the Kurdish process or not, and this will probably, in certain regions in the east and southeast, more dominant issue than others. And after the local elections, the expectations that the parliament might pass some form of legislation to conduct negotiations in a more legal framework. And support for the AK Parti, if AK Parti gets a higher vote, I would assume that it will embolden the party in taking probably a stronger step on this issue. Now, I personally believe both Gezi events and AK Parti Gülen split will have electoral implications for this election. But their impact in the long run will be limited compared to Kurdish issue. Now, if those of you who follow Turkey, you would remember that the last local elections was in 2009. And AK Parti received about 39% of the vote in the 2009 local elections, along with the two of the three biggest metropolitan areas and 2/3 of the metropolitan, what we call the big mayoralships. That includes like Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, Bursa, Konya, and these are major metropolitan cities in Turkey. So, but then in 2009 local elections, the mood was, this was a local election, this was not a general election. But on this Sunday's elections, the mood is not a local election mood. It is a general election or more a referendum mood. So, and even though I shouldn't do that, but I will go and take the risk and go for some numbers. And if AK Parti receives 40% or above, it will be considered a success. If it receives 43, 44 and above, this will be a decisive victory problem. But if AK Party goes down 39, then this will be a weakness and a loss in the elections. And this is not making up these numbers. Most logical analysts would come up with those numbers. Now, beyond 43-44%, it will likely encourage the Prime Minister Erdogan to run for the presidency in August. But a decision whether to run or not will probably not finalized until June, because for August elections, I believe the candidates will not come up before June. And also, if Prime Minister Erdogan does not, if Prime Minister Erdogan decides not to run, then AK Party may change this 3-term service ruling and allowing him to continue as the Prime Minister for a 4th term. And the final if that I have over here, if he runs and wins, then the party will have to continue with a new Prime Minister. And it is really difficult at this point to guess whom that person would be. Now, when it comes to opposition parties, with the exception of the Kurdish Nationalist Party, BDP, the rest of the opposition parties, which is namely the main opposition party, CHP, and the far-right MHP, made the corruption allegations the centerpiece of their election campaign for these local elections. If this strategy yields no significant results, then the opposition parties will have to come up with broader and more comprehensive election platforms instead of focusing entirely on the alleged failures of the ruling party. Also, when you look at the political parties one by one, the main opposition party, CHP, if they make a strong showing this weekend, then the leader of the CHP, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu's leadership will be strengthened. Keep in mind that CHP pursued a strategy where it is running with so-called non-traditional candidates. Some of them are close to the center, and some of them are even from far right. And this is very unusual of CHP. If you look at Ankara candidate for CHP is somebody who was the candidate from MHP in the 2009 elections, and Antakya, Hatay, which is the border city with Syria, and it is a million population, the current candidate from CHP is practically the person who is currently the mayor who was elected from AK Party. So if this strategy pays off, then this will give the CHP a chance to pursue a similar strategy in the presidential elections and, more importantly, in the general elections of 2015. If it doesn't work, then Kılıçdaroğlu may be challenged from within the party. And actually, if you look at it in that sense, this election is critical for the transformation for the CHP and whether it can become a center-left party in the long run. So the local elections have ramifications or implications for AK Party, but also it has on a different level for CHP and the CHP's behavior in the presidential elections and their choice of candidates and for the general elections. Now it seems that MHP, the far-right Turkish nationalist political party, which is the second opposition party in size, will try to hold on to its traditional constituency, and its success would indicate the level of discontent with the Kurdish peace process also, because that is mostly used by the MHP. But again, if you look at the recent polling data, it looks like that they will not make a big surprise, or they may not lose votes either. So that is the data is showing. Now, the last political party that has a group in the parliament, which is the BDP, and BDP in these elections having two different political parties in the mayoral elections. In the east and southeast, BDP is running candidates from BDP, and in the big metropolitan areas, they are running candidates from HDP to open the spectrum to non-Kurdish voters on a left-wing alliance, so to speak. And both parties, and you can consider them one easily, they are trying to prove once again that they are the legitimate representative of the ethnic Kurdish vote in the country. And they have strong candidates in Kurdish majority cities in the east and south. And they also want to come to the negotiation table strengthened in the local elections. Now, as those of you who follow Turkey, you know that the level of political polarization or political tension is unusually high. And this is not common for local elections, but I hope, that the political tension will go down after the election, but it will not go back to probably the normal because of the upcoming presidential elections. And the issues that matters most at this point for these elections, other than the Kurdish issue, I don't think the other issues will last for the later elections. Let me stop here, and I will try to answer any questions you might have later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cebeci. Ambassador Jeffrey, please.
Thank you very much, Kadir Bey. Thank you for your kind words. And Erol Bey, thank you for doing most of my job, because most of the things that I wanted to say you'd already mentioned. Is it on? Yeah. And I agree with the analysis. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the elections, then some of the implications of all of this for foreign policy, which is obviously an interest of mine and SETA's, and I assume many of you, and thank you all for coming out today. First of all, Erol listed 3.5 major issues. The Kurdish issue, Gezi, the Gulenist challenge, and in passing the economy as the half issue. I will elevate that a little bit higher because I think it is important, although I will define it a bit differently. Let me go down the list. On the Kurdish issue, and here I have to be careful and not conflate my personal views and biases with the objective identity and persuasion of a lot of Turks. The AK government has done a very, very good job, a courageous job, deserves a lot of credit, and this is a major plus, certainly objectively, from the standpoint of the outside world, from the standpoint of peace at home and peace in the region, and probably, on balance, I think will help Erdogan unless there is a special set of circumstances that empowers the National Action Party, which is violently anti-Kurdish, to a strategic position. That might happen, but all in all, that's a major plus for him. The Gezi events, as Erol said, which we could basically add on to various chapters up to the latest Twitter thing, as Erdogan's campaign against modernity, that's going to work against him, but not as much as we might think, because here in downtown Washington, between K and L streets, most people, whether right or left, basically have embraced modernity. Well, not everybody in Turkey has, or they embrace it in a ambivalent fashion, trying to blend modernity, technology, their laptops and their iPhones, with religious values and with cultural values that are hundreds and thousands of years old. And Erdogan speaks to this part of the population. Not everybody is going to sympathize with them. Even the violence and vehemence of his actions and his condemnations, we might, again, from the cool 21st century perspective most of us have, I think is just shaking our heads and saying, what is this guy thinking? Who would support him? Yeah, well, he's not looking for votes in America. He's looking for votes in Turkey. And I'll give an example of another country just to the north. As I heard the other night on a talk show, a couple of months ago, a majority of Russians, when polled, said, we don't want anything to do with anything about the Ukraine, including Crimea. And now they're ready to march and fight and die and give their firstborn male sons to the cause to rescue things. The reason is a powerful, charismatic leader can mobilize populations very well. And Erdogan is every bit as charismatic as Putin. He doesn't run around with his shirt off, but still he has a unique set of skills. So therefore the Gezi Park events, again, as Erol Bey said, it hasn't manifested itself in a specific party identity for various reasons that we could get into later. I don't think that the Republican People's Party is a natural home for a lot of these people. But still, on balance, that's a negative, just like on balance, with a lot of caveats, the Kurdish thing is a plus. The Gulenist issue, you have to split into two. The corruption accusations, which are so broad and so deep that they actually have a high degree of credibility, and I suspect have a high degree of credibility among even Erdogan's voters, are troubling because Erdogan and his party have basically run for the last 12, 13 years on the idea of a clean alternative to the corruption-drenched politics of Turkey in the past. So that's a negative. But the idea of Erdogan taking on the rule of law and an independent judiciary is a bit more complicated than it looks on the surface because, again, as Erol Bey pointed out, that independent judiciary, or at least major elements of it, were in the hands of a cabal, the Gulenists, who basically exercise more control over many of the people in this independent element of the state than their own consciences and their sworn oaths. Basically, they were collecting materials, I think probably largely true materials on Erdogan and his party, but the decision on when to go public was not generated by their duties as prosecutors, as police, as judges, but rather orders from above in their own little movement. And that's not a good thing for the rule of law. And it's something that Erdogan has pointed out when he went to Brussels, and he has a point. Nonetheless, the underlying problem for any of this is it raises huge questions about the rule of law. Either the people who are carrying it out, are they answerable to Erdogan? Are they answerable to the Gulenists? Are they answerable to their own ideological convictions? Very few of them seem to be answerable to the objective analysis of their duties as servants of the state. And that's a big problem because that gets to the fourth issue. And this is economy, and I include economy to encompass as well services. And here Erdogan has done an extraordinary job. He has the touch. He's not only helped the economy in all of the econometric terms advance dramatically, tripling of Turkey's GDP almost in less than 15 years. But in terms of services and the way people are treated in their constant exposures to the state apparatus, it is an extraordinary improvement, and he's got a lot of bounce from that. The problem over the longer term, but bear in mind elections on over the longer term, is that Turkey is not Russia, an extractive industries economy that can basically, as long as it pumps oil and gas and mines gold and other precious metals, will find its place in the global economy, even if it doesn't have a entrepreneurial spirit or system. Nor is it China, which again has a mercantilist system, but basically occupies the middle rungs of the development, production, assembly, sales model for a modern economy that is essentially, it's the biggest niche economy in the world. Turkey is a full-scale modern economy increasingly, and it can only survive if it can compete with other economies of like background, from South Korea and Malaysia and Indonesia to Hungary and Colombia. And these countries all have strong rule of law, or they're developing strong rule of law traditions, and they are extraordinarily wired into the international IT world. And Erdogan's attempts to unplug that, even though they're not successful, are going to lead to all kinds of problems in the world of investment, in the world of international finances, trade, lira accounts, and on and on. And we've seen some of that in the past. So that could hurt him a bit more. Now, on foreign policy, the point is there will be a day after next Sunday. And one way or the other, the dominant party in Turkey on the 31st of March will be the same dominant party on the 29th of March. It will be the AKP. The issue will be how dominant, and then, as Erol Bey laid out very well and very detailed, the decisions on the presidency, on a fourth term for Erdogan, all will flow from relatively limited divergences from, let's say, a standard of, you pick a number, 40, 42, 39 last time. And, or, if you look at the national elections, just short of 50% a few years ago. So, in any conceivable circumstance on the 31st of March, the Erdogan that I know is going to be trying to figure out how he can manipulate the results, and I use manipulate not in a negative sense, but in the sense of any good politician, how he will try to game the system to maximize his power and the power of his party to continue his quest for Turkey remade in the image that he wants. And here foreign policy is going to be very important because it's been a bit neglected in the past few months for many reasons, including the preoccupation with internal affairs and the fact that many of the Turkish projects, and this isn't a lick on Turkey, much the same could be said for the United States, have not been turning out well of late. But foreign policy, as we have just seen with the Ukraine and as Turkey just saw with Syria, has a way of not going away. So he's going to have to focus on that a bit, not only because it's coming knocking on the door, but it also is an opportunity for him to show again that he dominates the scene not only internationally, with his zero problems approach. Obviously there are problems everywhere, but at least with a guy who can deal with the problems and thus make them like zero problems approach, and the chance to divert people from whatever problems might have arisen from the results on Sunday. Turkey's foreign policy basically can be summed up in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 files. Syria, Iran, Iraq, Russia, Israel, the EU, 7. The EU, Cyprus, Greece, which is almost a subcategory of the EU, and US and NATO. Nothing else really matters a lot. And there are things that Turkey does that are good, such as their efforts in Afghanistan, and quite significant, but they don't have a real role in foreign policy other than reflecting their relations towards us, their relations towards the EU. Okay, on Syria, which is obviously the most dramatic right now, seeing as an old military man, when I read the story of the F-16 shooting down the MiG-23, I say, aha, revenge for the Phantom that was shot down a couple of years ago. This is not the thinking of most Americans, because most Americans haven't been in the military, but I think it's the thinking of most people in the Middle East that I know of. And so, score 1 for Erdogan. And he's dealing with a situation in Syria where his preferred outcome is looking less and less likely. And even worse for him, and worse for the United States, and worse for a lot of other countries in the region, it's looking like Assad, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and various other friends of theirs are going to win a messy Chechnya kind of victory in the middle of the Middle East. It is not a good thing for him, it's not a good thing for us. His responses to this were limited beyond rhetoric and a few military moves if the United States does not act. We don't know whether the United States is going to act. If there's anybody in this room or in this city who knows how President Obama is going to, what he's going to do on Syria, that person has not been identified to anybody I know. But Syria is still very important. It's next door, as we've seen, be it refugees, be it mass terror attacks. The impact of Syria on Turkey is considerable. Iran, there the situation will be quieter, in part because Iran is the focus of much of Turkey's view of Iran goes through Syria, to a lesser degree through Iraq, and is dependent upon them. Turkey has a more proper relationship with Iran now than it did about a year ago, but still they're two rivals, and Turkey is not going to be able to shake loose its concern, particularly this government's concern, about Iran as an ideological potential opponent or foe. Again, nothing dramatic. In Iraq, Iraq will have elections a little over a month from now. This time, unlike 2010, the Turks are not playing a major role. The Sunnis, which was their platform to play a role last time, are disunited because of the situation with Al-Qaeda in Anbar. It's hard to figure out how they will play in the elections. Maliki is looking strong by playing some of the same cards Erdogan has played. The other major area, and this of course reflects Turkish domestic affairs, its budding relationship with the Kurdistan regional government. That is being literally lubricated by oil and eventually, one hopes, at least in Turkey, gas. But and there was a pipeline built to the Turkish border and an agreement signed back in the spring, but that agreement has not been carried out nor even made public because of major legal and international problems, not only with the Maliki government but with us. And now all of the sides are trying behind the scenes to come up with a solution. If some kind of solution can be found, and if Maliki and Erdogan can put aside their deep personal antipathy, then there is a good chance that Turkey can benefit financially, and particularly in energy policies, not only from the Kurdish north, but from the country as a whole. And the country is expanding dramatically its oil exports and oil production, thanks in part to the sanctions against Iran. Everything in the Middle East fits with everything else. Russia, everybody knows the very convoluted historical and energy relationship Turkey has with Russia. There will be pressures on Erdogan because of the situation with the Tatar in Crimea, but also Turkey traditionally has not wanted to see a resurgent Russia. Its good relations with Russia in the past 20 plus years have been based upon the fact that it has plenty of buffers between Russia and Turkey's Black Sea border. Well, one buffer started crumbling in 2008, another one went a few days ago. So Turkey has to figure out for the first time in a long time what its Russia policy is. Israel, there are lots of signs being dangled by the Erdogan government and to some degree by the Israelis, but certainly by the Turks, that they're looking for after the elections, because there are people who would not like this who vote. A rapprochement with the Israeli government, perhaps leading to the famed exchange of ambassadors again, and a return to full and productive diplomatic relations. They've had good relations in some intelligence and military areas, in certain commercial areas, all during this period since 2010, but it's noticeable that they have not carried forth on the efforts that President Obama made when he was last in Israel. So be it the bids for the pipeline, the gas pipeline between Israel, the Leviathan field in Israel and Turkey, or the new hopes for a compensation agreement on the Mavi Marmara. There's some sign that Erdogan will use this again to draw attention to his responsible and important role internationally. EU, that goes both ways, and it's really hard to come down. My default position is whatever the least helpful and most self-damaging position will be, the EU will probably follow it. That might be unfair, but it's proven a good rule of thumb for many years. But the EU is going to have to look at the world more seriously after Ukraine for all kinds of reasons I won't get into here, but this has shocked their system like nothing else since 1989 has. And if they start acting seriously, either collectively or the major powers, if you can use that word, in the EU, coordinating amongst themselves, Britain, France, Germany, possibly collectively the Scandinavians, those are the powerful ones, and throw in the Netherlands, notice I'm not including the southern tier states, then a foreign policy that would make some sense might emerge. And any foreign policy that makes sense would normally include a far better policy towards Turkey. The problem is, again, everything is linked with everything else, Erdogan's posture as a guy who's part of a European family. We might wince in the United States at some of the things he says, but, you know, we're the country of Boston and Chicago politics and Huey Long and others, and we can kind of grin at a bad boy like Erdogan. Europeans can't. They're so serious, and everything he says is anathema. It's like this is their religion. Post-modern, thousand flowers bloom, pluralism ad nauseum, nationalism is awful, religion is poison. This is the European mindset, and Erdogan flies in the face of it even more than Putin. So it's going to be hard for the European Union to capitalize on its new foreign policy perspective, which I hope it has, by doing the obvious thing and trying to pull Turkey closer. In fact, what they'll say is, "Ooh, Ukraine's enough. I mean, all those pensions we might have to support," and whereas with Turkey they don't have to support pensions. But that's another argument. Okay, Cyprus, Greece. Something is happening there. It's hard to figure out what. Having to do with the economic straits those two countries have found themselves in, new governing coalitions on Cyprus, and the issue of gas in the Mediterranean potentially can lead to a serious warming of relations at some point. Again, one of the real pluses of the AK party was their courageous decision to support the Kofi Annan plan in 2004, and we know what happened. The Turkish Cypriots voted for it. The Greek Cypriots voted against it, and the Greek Cypriots were rewarded in the weird world of the EU. Finally, U.S., NATO, and you can consider it one. A lot flows from the rest of the foreign policy. To the extent Turkey is playing essentially more in the U.S. league on these things, then the natural tendency of the U.S. and Turkey, which is deep and long-standing, to come together will continue. Erdogan is, with his public statements and this war on modernity, an embarrassment for the Obama administration, and several of us know that how hard President Obama worked to make Erdogan his best friend in the region, if not the world. And so, and President Obama is very much a European kind of guy, and he will wince at all of these statements in a way that perhaps George Bush wouldn't, or Bill Clinton, who had his bad boy moments, might also not. But believe me, none of this is going to make President Obama happy, and that's going to make him hesitant to embrace Erdogan again, even if foreign policy needs push him in that direction. And then there are several of the usual problems in the relationship. Most recently, the purchase or the quasi-purchase of the Chinese defense system and whatever the fate of that will be, that are out there. But there is a lot of room for improvement. There's a possibility of improvement. Again, as with the European Union, the current constellation in Washington, less than most constellations in Washington, or more so than most constellations in Washington, is going to make it hard for this city to embrace an Erdogan who says anything like the things he says. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I'll turn to the audience now for questions. Yes.
I want to thank SETA for this timely event and both speakers for their insightful remarks. I have one question for each of them.
Sure.
For Erol Bey, I'm curious, I take your point very well that this is not an ordinary local election coming up. And as a result, I would think that we could probably expect a greater turnout. Historically, what are turnout figures for local elections, and what would a greater turnout mean for the results of the vote? And then my question for Ambassador Jeffrey would be that, again, I think I agree with everything you said. I'm just curious to what extent you think that any of these foreign policy issues will play into local calculus in either the upcoming local elections or the future elections.
Historically, the participation rate for elections is really high in Turkey compared to United States and Europe. And if my memory serves me correct, these are numbers between 82 to 90%. And when a local election is not a local election, but it is contested as a referendum or as a general election, I would expect something definitely more than 87, 88, 89, even maybe more than 90% of participation rate. And keep in mind that, I mean, even though Turkish Republic was established in 1923, the free and fair elections since 1950, so it is almost 65 years. So the Turkish electorate is heavily involved in both the political discussion and, I mean, in my judgment, they are more than heavily involved in political discussion. But the participation rates were never a problem in Turkey. But this one will be a 90 or above % problem.
They shouldn't, foreign policy probably won't have a role in the elections this weekend because there isn't much time and there hasn't been much play despite the shoot down. The only possible exception would be, and it's very unlikely, but I'll just throw it out so that people don't say, hey, this guy was totally wrong, look what happened on Thursday. If the Syrians decide that they're really pissed off at their plane getting shot down, which probably was shot down on the Syrian side of the border, and they decide to do something. Now, they'll be advised by the Russians, who are smart, not to act before the elections because this will push Erdogan and give him an opportunity to play the nationalistic card by reacting to the reactions. But none of these people are totally rational, as we've seen certainly with Putin and Assad. Erdogan is the most rational of the group, but if there's any retaliation against the Turks, Erdogan will respond, and he would respond before the election. That could have an impact. Where this is all of importance is, again, we're going to have presidential elections. Presidential elections are going to be really important for Erol, regardless of whether Erdogan runs or not, regardless of whether it's part of a scheme to have a new constitution and create a presidential system, or you're going to go with the current constitution, or some only minor variant thereof, because it's essential, above all, that an AKP person win those elections. Because that is so, regardless of whether it's Erdogan or somebody else, he's going to look very closely at these various foreign policy issues to see which can display himself in the AKP as the party that can navigate Turkey through this really messy world better than any other. So I think that you'll see foreign policy activism regardless of what happens on Sunday.
Yes. And then can you just take the...
Hi, my name is Audrey Williams. I'm from the Student Center, and I also want to thank our speakers today for this great discussion. So my question can be for either speaker, but Erol, you talked about how you felt that the Kurdish issue is going to be the one issue that really kind of bleeds into the other elections, whereas the Gezi Park protests, the Gulen movement split will maybe fade out, but the Kurdish issue will be constant. And so I wanted to know if either of you had insights into how you see the Kurdish issue, the Kurdish peace process playing out. I know that last week, Abdullah Öcalan gave another statement after a year after the peace process kind of started, and talked about how there needed to be now some more movements towards negotiations. And so, Erol, you talked about the possibility of legislation for those negotiations. And so I wanted to know how much, I mean, the AKP is likely going to do pretty well in these elections, or at least considering everything. And so, do you think there will be movement for the AKP to continue with this peace process to deliver on those negotiations that Öcalan talked about, or do you think that even if things calm down a little bit, the year of elections will still focus more on internal dynamics, and a lot can happen in a year. If the AKP doesn't move quickly, would the PKK kind of rise up again? So I wanted to hear both of your thoughts on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Erol?
Now, obviously, the Öcalan side is one side of the negotiations, and when he had issued the statement, and it was read both in Istanbul and in Diyarbakir, and last week during the Nevruz and on Sunday in Istanbul, this is the position of the PKK. But it is PKK's argument, or Öcalan's argument, was that these talks or whatever you would like to call them, negotiations, talks, and they were not sitting on a legal framework. That it is that means that it can collapse at any time, and it can be. I mean, all the improvements, whatever the improvements is there in terms of agreements on the process, can you have to start from the beginning. So, and also, they made these statements that a commission in the parliament has to be established and those kind of things, and the ruling party has consistently stated that this is a stage, this will be done, but this is then, let's complete the first one, that is the withdrawal of the PKK people from outside the country. So it is my guess that if AK Party gets beyond what is expected normally from AK Party, beyond 40%, AK Party will be emboldened to make move, to try to put this thing into a proper frame. And so I think it will make both, I mean, the BDP, MHP, and AK Party will look at the results both in the heartland Anatolia, which is the most conservative part of the country, and also in the east and southeast, where the Kurdish people are a majority. And depending on the results from there, and depending on the ruling party's support, they will either try to keep the status quo, don't do anything, or roll back some of the things, or move forward. But the reason that I said that the other issues are shorter term, more effective, Kurdish issue is longer term, but less effective in this election, because, I mean, Kurdish issue, there's not one single person in the country who's not really be impacted with the Kurdish issue. It has been too long, too many lives lost, too many treasuries lost. And so it is, at some point it was the most fear of a parent, whether a mother or father, was if you have a son and the son will be going to military and the military service is compulsory, and if the fight is going on, what will happen to my son? So at this point, the process is sustained, and it might be sustainable in the short term, but I don't think without moves from the government in terms of putting in a better frame that is understood and accepted, this can be sustained in a longer term.
I agree. Mine is something really disastrous happening. The momentum to more or less go forward will continue.
Thank you. In the back here.
Thank you very, very much. My name is Ken Dante. A question about marriage and divorce. Again, this is the Erdogan-Gulen marriage and the imminent separation and divorce. What is the deeper roots of that? What has happened? What's kind of happening behind the scenes of what appeared to be a successful marriage at the time?
Thank you. Remarriage, you mean?
Oh, there is the question of remarriage also? I didn't get that.
Okay. Now there is a divorce.
You see, you need to understand that both Gülen movement and AK Party comes from a very similar basis and backgrounds. So moving together and doing things together was it was very natural. So this was not a arranged marriage, so to speak. This was a marriage of convenience, if I have to use that. Let's say cooperation. And keep in mind that the size and the strength and power of both at this point was not the same in 2002. So when those decisions were made, and I don't think anybody really sat down and made the decision, okay, let's move on together. This was natural, and they needed. Both sides needed, and you can argue who needed more to the other one, or who contributed what on this one. But most of the people who makes or who asks some questions on this issue, they have this fallacy of the size and the strength and power of both in 2002 and 3 and in 2013 and 14. We are talking different things now than at that time. That is number one. Number two, the country is different. Okay? In 2002, 2003, both groups had gone through the trauma of what we call in Turkey the February 28 process. So you practically were gone through alive from a process that wanted to kill both of you at the same time. And this was a survival thing at that time. So people I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I would assume as a human being that people who go through similar traumas, that they have a tendency to cooperate. I don't want to prolong, but the thing is that it was natural and it had complementary things for both sides. AK Party, when it came to power, did not have an educated people with college diplomas, not in the size that they needed to run the bureaucracy. So the Gülen group and Gülen supporters were the most natural fit. And for them, it is also, for the first time, a political party that was so close to their lifestyle, their vision, their understanding was in power as a single party government. So this was a very natural cooperation. Now, divorce obviously is, you can argue from either side that when you come to, again, a certain power and certain level of independence, probably each side would like to do the things or have more saying. And so, with all the differences, we are not comparing two equal things. This is, one of them is a political party, the other one is a civil society organization. So my hunch that when both sides comes to this level of power that they have, political, economic, bureaucratic, it is very difficult to concede or to sacrifice some of your ability to make a decision. And then both sides would like to do things independently, and that becomes a power struggle, basically. I'm not really sure whether I answered the question that you asked, but this is the best I can come up.
Thank you.
One here and then.
Hello, Stephen Kokoris, American Hellenic Institute. Thank you very much for hosting this event. My question is for Ambassador Jeffrey. You touched upon Erdogan's action to shut down Twitter because he was against the modernity, I think you said. Twitter has been used as an organizing tool in most, if not all, of the Arab Spring anti-governmental protests. Do you think it really was because of modernity, or do you think it was so he could take away the tool of organization to prevent protests and further detrimental information reaching the Turkish voters before the election?
It was a mix of motives. I think that my assessment of it, and bear in mind, this isn't the first time he's done something like this. He's done it about half a dozen times with bits and pieces of what we would call modernity or pluralistic modern societies, the kind of things that the EU publishes. Washington telephone directory-sized books on standards for. And yeah, some of it was the specific idea of blocking another means for people to exchange information and rise up. But as I said, he's tried that before. It hasn't succeeded. Obviously, this wasn't going to succeed. I mean, you could predict what would happen, which is President Gül would immediately twit on his Twitter account that he's not going to go along with it and everything else. And it's so obvious that I think that the deeper motive is he's very concerned about modernity. Because modernity, and this gets to the last question, which I tried to duck, but now I'll get back to it on the Gülenists versus the Rump AKP. Turkey, and this isn't a particular criticism of Turkey or even Erdogan, because I've seen this in other countries, and I think it's part of most countries' evolution towards a democratic, say Sweden, to the extent they're all going to make it. Each of the political blocs of power centers, either legitimate, like a party or a government, or supposedly not so legitimate, like the army or like a cabal of prosecutors and judges, believes in power in absolute terms and has a visceral ideological reaction to anything that undercuts the absolute execution of power. The Gülenists will think the same way as Prime Minister Erdogan does. I know the military back when I was there in the 1980s felt that way as well. And therefore, if they see something that reflects, when I say modernity, what I mainly, it's basically a code word for pluralism, free space, individual decision, bubble up from below, rather than command economy, command policy and government from the top. And I think that Erdogan is not alone in reacting against that on visceral ideological terms. It wasn't just trying to shut down a media outlet that was tormenting him, in part because, as I said, plenty of people could have and probably did advise him that it wasn't going to work. It was simply, he hates this.
Yes. Wait for the mic.
Sharon Wiener from FSI. This is for Erol. And to go back to the Gülen issue, I have two questions. First of all, what do you think, I know the Gülen movement, obviously, in terms of a voting bloc is minuscule compared to the the supporters of AKP, but when we're talking about results being significant with just a few percentage points different, the question is how much of the voting electorate percentage do you think is represented by supporters of Gulen, and where do you think they're going to use their votes in these elections? And separate question, what is Erdogan going to do about the Gulen supporters after these municipal elections? I've heard from lots of people from a whole range of political perspective that after he gets through these elections, the municipal elections, he's going to look on this movement as he has every other opponent that he's come across, and will do whatever he can to eliminate them. I mean, what will he do, for example, about the Gulen supported press outlets, for example, in Turkey?
The first question is what would be the size of electorate or the influence of Gulen? Again, this is I mean, you can speculate. I mean, there is no real numbers that anybody has counted, but again, this will be my guess and my hunch. This will not be more than between 3 to 5% of the electorate. This is not a small number, thinking that, I mean, the country, I'm sure the Gulen support base is much larger than that one, but the AK Party and Gulen bases are so much like intermingled. So I believe if the Gulen movement decides to actively not to support AK Party in the elections, which I wouldn't blame them. If I was a Gulen supporter, I wouldn't support AK Party, and I would be frank. And so the number of votes that they can have an impact and influence, I don't expect that will be more than 4 or 5%. But this is again, when we are talking decisions of presidential elections, to run, not to run, this is a sizable election. But I don't think it will go as a block to one single party. So it will go to the political parties, and in each locality, this is again my guess, that whoever is the strong candidate against AK Party in that locality. And that is a strategy, and it will not make a CHP or MHP more stronger, but it will make the AK Party weaker, which is a reasonable strategy. So that is what I can say in the first part of your question. Second part of the question, now what will happen, or what I mean, obviously I cannot speak on behalf of him or his mind, but what is expected? And I'm reading constantly both sides, everybody. So an operation of some kind is expected in Turkey, and this is expected even by the Gulen media outlets talk about this thing. But looking at the size of the group and looking at the closeness of both AK Party base and Gulen base, I think that it will be very much limited to the people who can use the state power to disrupt things, and that is no more than probably the Justice Department, Interior Ministry, and certain key ministries. And I don't think there will be something of like, I mean, the numbered in thousands or like top-down approach. It will be, my guess is the strategic and more operational and ability to operate against government in a synchronized way. This will be disrupted. And again, this remains to be seen, but that is my guess at this point. And keep in mind, this is a very, very difficult thing for the ordinary supporters of both sides, because you have families, you have marriages, you have neighborhoods, you have, I mean, in the same apartment, so, and people with very similar lifestyles, very similar ideologies, so it is very difficult for both sides. So whatever each side does, it is not only you are solving a problem, but you cannot and should not create newer problems. Now, and again, this is not asked, but I would like to, I mean, I was in the parliament when the operations against the former military or the active military people, this Balyoz and Ergenekon and those kind of were going on. And you knew that there were things that did not sound right. And you have to justify this one way or another. And in my mind, and most of my friends' mind, the justification was that what is trying to be accomplished over here is the right thing for the country. So in a size of this size of an operation, you cannot really precise. So basically, let me not call it was like a collateral damage thing. Okay, so it is the idea, I mean, the understanding of, I mean, on this size of operation, when this is done, when it is for the good of the country, you cannot avoid collateral damage. But now, when you look back, how that, at that time it seemed that that is understandable collateral damage can come and bite you, so that you have to be really careful in what you are doing right now to minimize the collateral damage or to avoid it if it is possible. And I think if I can take lessons, I'm sure the people who make decisions, they take lessons also, they conclude lessons also. I'm sorry, probably I said more things than...
Yes, Richard.
I've got a question primarily for Ambassador Jeffrey. This is prompted by, question primarily for Ambassador Jeffrey, prompted by the discussion of modernity. I think a lot of American observers of Turkey thought in the early parts of the 2000s that we understood where things were progressing, both with the AK Party and with the U.S.-Turkish relationship. It seemed to be going on a line that headed towards modernity in terms of multi-party democracy, the ending of military tutelage, expansion into individual freedoms. And that's why I think it's harder for Americans to understand now that it seems to be stuck in a band that looks a little bit more like what has been called authoritarian democracy. So I guess my question to you is do you think Turkey's on a line that heads to a certain place and it looks a lot like Holland or the United States? Or are they in a band in which they're comfortable based on national traditions and regional norms? And are we just going to have to live to learn with that dissonance?
Yeah, modernity has had a bad decade. And obviously Russia is Exhibit A, but Iraq and Afghanistan are right up there for countries that we put a lot of effort into and seemingly going the wrong way. There was a theory in the 1990s associated with Francis Fukuyama, who is recanted, Thomas Friedman, who is recanted, and others, that this is inexorable. You cannot avoid it because the public's armed with Twitter, armed with cell phones, armed with email, armed with the internet, armed with a global market, simply are not going to put up with authoritarian types marching around, invading their neighbors, and cracking down on individual rights. And we've just gone through a decade where we've seen all of that happening. My feeling is we've seen a lot of countries. South Korea is a good example. Greece is an example. Spain is an example. Portugal is an example. Go through very long and difficult periods. Taiwan, Thailand, Philippines, very difficult, long periods before they would, you could say, their democratic fundamentals are totally anchored and are never going to be challenged. And I think you can say it about those countries, but it took a long time. And it took a long time for the United States in a civil war. So even then, it wasn't perfect. So essentially, I don't get too troubled by this because I'm a historical pessimist. But America is full of historical optimists, and they're all having a really bad day. Okay, not just because of Turkey.
Well, I think I'll close it on that note, and thank you very much for joining us. Thanks.